How do I do this? I legitimately forgot how to do all this. Hi. Hi. My name is Yana. I'm a modern Ajumma. I got busy, and then I got very sick, and then I got very busy. I'm fully aware that it is almost the end of May. Am I fully aware? It is May. Nevertheless, let's talk about. I read a lot of books in February. Oh my god. And I'm still coughing. Hopefully I'll edit all of my coughing out, because I'm imagining that would be very unpleasant to listen to. My beautiful voice, where did it go? In February, I read a lot of books, and I would be I missed this. For a little bit, I was thinking, what is keeping me continuing on BookTube, doing monthly wrap-ups and talking about the books that I read? I lost my voice for a good 4 weeks. It is now like week 7, 8 since. I still feel like I'm a little bit sick. What was I gonna say? Oh, now this is all coming back to me. This is what all of my videos are like. I start saying something and then I immediately lose my train of thought. I have like minutes of silence that I cut out in the editing process. I look at my notes and just pray to God that it all ends up somehow somewhat, if not intelligent, at the very least understandable. I was thinking to myself, should I even bother continuing with this BookTube thing? And at the end of the day, I enjoy doing this. I miss you guys. I love you guys. I love the conversations that happen in the comments, the friendships that have been made over the course of the 2 years that I've been doing this. 3 years of BookTube. And yeah, so anyway, I'm back. Hello. The Art of William Steig. I borrowed this book from the library, and since then I have found a copy to purchase. Because the more I thought about it, the more I really enjoyed this. I loved looking through the illustrations. William Steig is the writer and illustrator of most notably Shrek, as well as other, I guess, lesser known since they don't have any DreamWorks movie adaptations of them, but nevertheless classic children's stories. And there are some essays, as is usual per art book. In the beginning, essays written by various people who have known Steig, including, I believe, his wife, colleagues, which I found made this book that much more readable. Like, it doesn't come across at all as like an academic book, which a lot of art books tend to be like, rendering them practically unreadable, IMO, even if I enjoy the artwork. But I did not know anything about William Steig. I didn't even know that Shrek is a beloved children's book. I was unaware until reading this book that Shrek means fear in Yiddish, as Shrek is a monster, an ogre. It has been a while since I have watched a Shrek film, but I found this book to be incredibly charming. I loved looking at all of Steig's illustrations. I love looking at the prominent pen and ink drawings with watercolor and gouache, that he kept the colors very pure. I find that watercolor is just the best when it's kept very simple like this, and let the really expressive pen and ink drawings stand out. It just creates the maximum impact with the lightest touch. And this is like a survey over his entire career of decades. And it's really remarkable to me how he kept it loose, his drawings loose, for so long. I think it's more common for artists to, get tighter and tighter and kind of art themselves into a corner that ends up getting harder for them to come out of as they start pigeonholing themselves into ideas. And it's that much harder to find artists who remain consistent and not care that they're, just doing the same thing all the time, maybe perceived as like boring since people have seen their work in this way for so long and they don't feel the need to change it up. There is something to be said about consistency. Another artist that I can think of that falls under that category, one of my favorites, Fernando Botero. So discovering the art of William Steig is very exciting for me. I would have loved to say that I discovered this artist and writer from reading kids' books with my child. Alas, I have a son who hates to read, hates books, and it's really just me trying to find, what do kids like to read? Maybe my kid will one of these days. And that's how I found William Steig. I loved the detail that Steig loved to watch, was it Mexican talk shows or telenovelas? But he would watch it on mute since he didn't speak Spanish. But he would just love to look at faces and different facial expressions, and hence how he is able to just draw so many of these awesome faces. So I highly recommend that book if you are into art books, if you care to know about the person who created the character Shrek. I am a fan. I found his art to just feel very fresh and natural and very personal, always coming from a very observational point of view. Steig also has a lot of New York Times covers, the New Yorker covers, in addition to his children's book work. I mean, just look at all these gestures within each face. It's so delightful. So yes, I highly recommend. This was a delightful find. I should really do like an art book collection video one of these days. It's almost summer. I'm gonna have more time in the future. Fingers crossed. I guess we'll just keep on with the nonfiction that I read in February and then maybe some backlist and end with the new releases. I read a ton of new releases back in February. So Home Cooking by Laurie Colwin. I also read this as a library book and enjoyed it so much I continued to find a copy of it to purchase. And again, there are some wonderful illustrations in this book by Anna Shapiro. There's a great foreword in this by Ruth Reichel that I love because she said that Colwin is just one of those normal people who the world needs more of to make it a better place. No one who cooks alone. Even at her most solitary, a cook in the kitchen is surrounded by generations of cooks past, the advice and menus of cooks present, the wisdom of cookbook writers. This is like a collection of essays where she just talks about what she thinks about home cooking. Very simple and straightforward. But I was got by the first sentence. Unlike some people who love to go out, I love to stay home. And then she just goes on to describe how even when she goes on vacation, she just loves to stay like in the house that she's renting, go grocery shopping at the vacation site and just cook at home. Same. I loved an observation that she made where elegant women who don't know how to cook, but they do know how to shop and wear, which is just as good. A friend beats a cookbook hands down. You can't cross-examine a cookbook. This book is just the best argument for food books over cookbooks, and what I'm looking for in a food book. One summer in a rented country house, I had a flirtation with my landlady's food processor and vowed to marry one when I got home. Why, it pureed the soup. It shredded the carrots in 2 seconds. How had I ever lived without one? She's so cute. Pots and pans are like sweaters. You may have lots of them, but you find yourself using 2 or 3 over and over again. She's so wise. Dinner alone is one of life's pleasures. Certainly cooking for oneself reveals man at his weirdest. She's so astute. Yeah, I guess all of this is to say that this is what I was looking for. This is what I had expected when I was reading Elizabeth David. So I really wish that I read Laurie Colwin before I read Elizabeth David so that I could maybe appreciate Elizabeth David more. I still found Laurie Colwin to be very much of her generation, meaning to say that I still found her viewpoints to be very old. because there's a lot of like 80s stereotypes, but not like anything overtly offensive. Yes, there's lots of dinner party descriptions, but I just found them all to be very cozy and comforting. This just felt like talking to a friend, a good friend, a friend that I want to have forever, a friend that I hope to be. Rogues, True Stories of Grifters, Killers, Rebels, and Crooks by Patrick Radden Keefe, which I read via a library audiobook, read by the author, but since February I have found a copy of from a friend of mine who just gave it to me because she's about to move and needed to get rid of all of her books. So I picked this one from her collection, and I was so thrilled about the find. I highly recommend the audiobook. These are, I believe, a compilation of New Yorker essays of his various investigative journalism. But the audiobook was very fun and very easy to listen to. Some of these stories were just wild. I thought the wine forgery story was a risky but such a strong start. And all of these stories range from like very obscure stories such as the Thomas Jefferson wines to something extremely in demand like Mark Burmanet's true relationship with Donald Trump. I'm glad to know about that. I believe every single story is left kind of open. There's no like tidy close to the end of each story, and instead we're left with some very inferring conclusions of the aftermath. Like each story felt like an appetizer for a full-length documentary that I would watch each and every single one of. For instance, with the Mark Burnett story, Patrick Radden Keefe infers that Burnett's probably just not very political of a person and basically just de-gaffs. He doesn't care. And isn't that the true face of evil? Like, evil isn't explicit hate. It's when people are indifferent. I found the death penalty defense attorney story the most compelling. I had a long debate about it with my husband. And I guess the biggest takeaway that I had was the weight of sitting on a jury and how wonderful that there are people who care so much. I was just so impressed by Patrick Radden Keefe's writing in Say Nothing that I had to continue reading more, but perhaps something a little lighter than a topic such as the IRA. And this definitely hit the spot. I got the sense that even though I know that it's a collection of articles that he wrote over a course of time, it just felt like his taking a break book after Empire of Pain. But just because this is lighter, it does not suffer in quality, and it's still very impressive. I really enjoyed this. I read Run Towards the Danger, Confrontations with the Body of Memory by Sarah Polley via a library audiobook read by the author. Sarah Polley of Women Talking fame, I believe she directed it and wrote the screenplay. I was so happy for her when she won that Oscar. Without knowing anything about her, and now that I've read her memoir, I am that much more happy for her that her IMDb photo is of her holding her Oscar. Like, go her. So this is very much a feminist memoir along the lines of Emily Ratajkowski's My Body, with the added child acting experiences that I originally went in, I am ashamed to say, with a lot of skepticism, because I'm just very aware of K-pop training, like that's all children, and just how prevalent that culture is of making children do a lot of things in the name of commerce. But holy shit, did Sarah Polley go through the ringer. She personally had zero parental protection, regularly worked very tough conditions, even for adults, but as a small child, experienced a lot of stalking, harassment, and I found her writing in this memoir to be incredibly thoughtful. A lot of raw insights into survivor mentality, such as, despite being hurt by a man, girls are psychologically trained to de-escalate situations, make men feel better, and acquiesce at all costs. Like, she makes the case that women are trained to behave a certain way and then are punished for doing it, which we are hearing a lot more ever since #MeToo. And as I was reading all of this, I just kept thinking, since I do have a little boy and I spend a lot of time with children, and I see how pretty wild little girls are these days, or at least compared to when I was a little girl. Like, what a positive thing that is, and a sign of change, hope for the better. Like, hopefully these girls just won't put up with so much shit ever again. And of course, I thought of the Paris memoir, and I found this memoir to be the polar opposite in terms of where they're coming from, their viewpoint, despite the very similar childhood traumas. Like, both women are concerned for future kids facing similar fates. Both of their books' purpose is to advocate for those children. I would even say that both books are smug in their own ways, but the differences and the reason why I just loved Polley's book so much more than the Paris book is that Sarah Polley acknowledges both sides of each argument of child versus adult, and lays out this very crucial detail that no matter how much a child loves to perform, how mature they may come across as, there should be no reason to have a child work in a capitalist-driven environment, that their physical and mental safety can never be guaranteed because there is always going to be the bottom line of business that will always be prioritized over the child. And yes, this comes from privilege. Poor families be willing to sacrifice more for money. And that is a whole starting point for debates to be had about, should children be paid actors, paid workers? Like, should children work in the entertainment industry? Like, though, if you think about like movies, TV shows, whatever that children are in, like professional children have been in, for the most part, they're like relatively safe. However, you just, there's more involved. You won't always know. And this book should be a primary source for every responsible parent, adult who may have to face this question one day, but for the argument of why you should protect children from the specific harm of paid work. And lastly, the title itself is proof that she acknowledges her capacity to be wrong, unlike Paris Hilton's inability to acquiesce. So I love to read feminist memoirs, typically in July during the summertime. I highly recommend this book to anyone who are interested in knowing about Sarah Polley as a person. If you ever had or will need to or have wondered about the whole should children be working in the entertainment industry debate, this is a must not miss. I guess I will go in order of publishing date of the next few backlists. This is Mrs. Rosie and the Priest by Giovanni Boccaccio, which is what are these called? Penguin Little Black Classics. That I really just want to brag that Sophie of Bibliosophie sent to me as a letter in a book. How delightful is she for doing this? She sent me this in the mail and wrote a letter in it, and I read the letter. I read this book back in February. I just found that to be a delightful surprise. She was telling me that she found this box set for really cheap somewhere and had the idea to use each of these books as like funny stationery. She is so cute. I believe this is part of the Decameron. She mentioned the Decameron. I've never read the Decameron. Never heard of it. Because I am a dumb American. But as for these funny, horny stories, men suck. that was all I thought of this, and that I find Sophie to be very delightful. Look, she even writes notes in the margins. So my takeaway, follow Bibliosophie, befriend her, she's wonderful. Enigma Variations by Andre Aciman. I can't believe I never noticed the cover art. Like, these people are boinking. This is a very sensual photo. I just saw the pink and the gray and like lovely lines. And I know that it's like something you don't pay attention to because you're not notified of it in advance. But I love it when covers do that. Where you see the meaning, like the meaning is very clear once you read the book. So that was maybe like the best part of my reading experience with Enigma Variations. Don't get me wrong, I found Aciman's writing to be very wonderful, very smart, very highbrow, like lovely, yearning writing. Aciman is obviously a very thinky writer, but I am no longer in my 20s, and this level of all-consuming emotions just doesn't happen to me. Or at least it is not like my main thing in life. I'm a very tired mom approaching 40. so so I just didn't care what sexual fantasies that this man was consumed by. Like, I was reading this and kind of thinking in the back of my head, oh, should I put my son into this summer camp? So while I was very impressed by the writing and I found it to be fine, I was not compelled. Like, he is living his life, I am living my life. The two aren't colliding. And also just some heebies from the age gap. And don't get me wrong, had I read this book in my 20s, I would have made this my entire personality. Because it's such a wonderful blend of highbrow, aching romance, and intelligent existential musing, Italiano style. Lots of saying without saying it. Everyone is very cool. She, I have always suspected, may be the polished version of the rough draft her son still is. Ooh, how cool. And then when I'm all the way in and want to tell you that this is the best life can offer, you'll nod again and bite your lip, which I now want to bite more than anything in the world, as you finally reach up to me and kiss me with your tongue deep in my mouth. What I'll regret is never seeing your face when you come, never holding your knees or caressing your face many, many times, or even knowing that tinge of disappointment after sex that immediately begs to be expiated with more sex. Like, bro, I would love to be there with you. I'm just not. So, what is that? Solid 3 stars? If you're there, you're there. If you're not, you're not. That's what this book is like. That's what I'm here to tell you. The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. Oh, The Bluest Eye. Oh my god. I bet you read this with Nathan. It was my first Toni Morrison. Ooh. This was my first Toni Morrison. I like the trepidation I had watching Room. Like, this is exactly what I was afraid of. I knew what it would entail. I knew that, like, my heart would be wrung. I knew it would be sad. I was afraid of all of that. But because of the solid hands of Toni Morrison, I was very much okay. I'm very okay. I loved The Bluest Eye. I was so wowed by it. I mean, it has really tough things like incest, the injustice of childhood. It's a story about children, but written so strong with an emphasis on the feelings and what it's like at the core that makes this work, and not just work, but work so well. There's a constant threat of adult violence. There's a lot of sex in this, but not at all in the vein of Andre Aciman. Very much I don't know what other word to use other than mature, the very mature integrity of Toni Morrison. Like, I always, like, personally for me, my personality is, if something is hard, I don't want to do it, and nothing is worth me doing the hard thing. And I look at other people who are very capable and do those hard things, makes them look easy to do, and I look at those people and I go, how are you doing this so easily? This is very hard. I don't even want to get out of bed to even start doing the hard thing. But Toni Morrison's characters are constantly doing the hard thing, and she makes you see why they do the hard thing. And how else to say that but just, it's life. They're living their lives. They pursue love. They pursue happiness. And she just makes it feel so goddamn beautiful. I lulled at the narrator Claudia's big Aries energy. Just immediately choosing violence every day, and that is the only appropriate energy for telling this story. And I was so delighted. I've heard so much of the very specific Toni Morrison heartache, and I am very delighted to find that the hype is real. Oh my god, so real. It's very hard to articulate why. Like, I was constantly asking myself, how is this happening? Like, how did she write these sentences? How is she continuing to write this book? And all I can really come up with is just integrity, maybe at the core. I found the spring chapter about the parents to like just make this book. It is the essence of this book. The pain of generational racism to make a Black woman think higher, treat better of her white employers than her own children, to be... If you, like I, have been nervous, have been wary about starting Toni Morrison, I implore you, don't. The Bluest Eye is her first published book. It is a great place to start. I loved my time reading this. I love this book. And yeah, newly minted Toni Morrison fan. Wait, where's my hat? There is an entire hat for this. Toni Morrison Evangelist. If it's still available, I will link it below. I was so impressed by Bluest Eye that I continued to read Sula. I heard Kat talking about this a lot. Of Toni Morrison in general. She made a great video that I will also link below. That really made me realize, like, you don't have to be an expert on something to make a video on it. You can still, like, continue to have your journey in whatever the topic may be. In her instance, it's Toni Morrison. She is also making a Toni Morrison journey this year. So definitely watch that video. And I also wanted to mention that in these newer vintage editions, they all have a foreword written recently by Morrison that are like very illuminating essays giving more context of the time of writing the books, like the politics surrounding her books, her life, the characters, and how they all lived through it. That I find like an integral piece of each book. So what did I write in my notes? I wrote, not since Nabokov have I read breathtaking writing such as this, lyrical, vivid, evocative, showing who the writer is as a person, exactly where she's coming from. Yes, gasp-inducing, shocking, sad scenes, but you get past it because you just have to, and it still lingers as it should, but you're left in awe of the utter tenacity of people and the human experience. Yes. The sex writing, just as grounded, aching, real. Reality behind the adage of love makes the world go round, but we are so far from rom-com Nancy Meyers territory. Yes. I marked the pages of the scene when a daughter asks a mother whether she ever loved her or not, and the mother's entire response, this part. The pacing is so clever, so impactful without feeling manipulative at all, and just everything lingers afterwards. I cannot emphasize how beautiful this is, how beautiful all of Morrison's books that I've read so far are, and perhaps surprisingly so given the context and the nature of the stories, given like the gravity and solemnity of the content. The part where Nell is sitting in the bathroom thinking about what happened, how Sula says hell is no change, always having the same thing with no end to that, how boring that is, that hell is boredom, but Nell is thinking that hell is the opposite. Hell is constant change, having no permanence. I probably just laid in bed staring at the ceiling for 30 minutes, I think, debating with myself about that. And my only conclusion is I have a feeling that every decade we're going to flip-flop between Nell and Sula's viewpoints. Personally, I am on Team Nell, where it is living hell to have constant change and to have to constantly pick up and go. Out of the two, I mean, if I had to pick, I did love the Bluest Eye a lot, and Sula I found just as compelling, just as intriguing and beautiful. I don't know, it's hard to choose between the two. I really enjoyed both. So now I'm going to talk about all of the current releases, newer releases. I listened to and reread Romantic Comedy by Curtis Sittenfeld on a library audiobook. It was read by Kristen C. So, technically a new experience since the first time around I read it as a physical copy. And really, I just listened to it as an excuse to revisit a favorite. I loved romantic comedy. When I first read it this time around, I just kind of went to it during a very particularly poopy Valentine's Day weekend. And just as an excuse to catch up on SNL and just laugh. I wanted to laugh and I wanted to feel happy. Lines like, rubbed cheap lotion on my legs and expensive lotion on my face. It just shows me that she gets it. She's a real person, that this is for me. It is compulsive as ever, especially on audio. I find Sittenfeld's audiobooks to be so easy to listen to have on the background, to like, like a just throwing on a Nancy Meyers movie on in the background. It is the equivalent, like the book equivalent of that. It is the book equivalent to a pint of ice cream, bottle of Chardonnay, a season of Sex and the City. Very easy to love, like squealing, kicking my feet, biting my lip. The first time I read romantic comedy, I felt so much more like, or with most Curtis Sittenfeld books, really, I feel much more like the lead male character. I feel like I'm the jock, like the rock star, falling in love with the neurotic, awkward girl. But this time around, I felt more like Sally, like the talented woman of my own right, who finally finds a good partner. It just, I wanted to feel that particular satisfaction. I almost didn't log this into my Goodreads Storygraph because it was such a quick read, but I just wanted to acknowledge it because I do love this book so much. I read Wayward by Emilia Hart as a library ebook. This is, I guess, left field for me. I don't typically read books like this. It is definitely not quite my flavor at all. I found this to be very one note. Like, all of the women are creative, sensitive souls. All the men are rapey bores. I found the tone to be quite self-pitying. I thought it was a fun story, which felt very weird because these are stories of women in dire circumstances for them to heroically emerge from. So quite tasteless. The whole magical realism with the bugs I found very tasteless as well. Like, its purpose is to bring whimsy to lighten the dark subject matter and bring like an element of hope. The whole vibes were like the bokeh lights filter from the 2010s. Like an emo close-up pic of wrist scars. It just felt very formulaic, very cheesy, a lot of unnecessary foreshadowing. Felt like a CW series starring a very softly lit Katherine Heigl. It's just not good when I can hear the dramatic score swelling, crescendoing at all of the plot points. But my biggest problem with these types of books is that it feels like they pride themselves on being different from the other girls. But like the only difference is that they're brunette as opposed to blonde. And they both still uphold the same values of having ivory skin and being heroes with like a villain. And I found very annoying like the delusions the main characters lived under. Like, they're all set up for these particular failures so that they can have their triumphs at the end. Having said all this, I still found this to be a super compulsive and very fast, very fun read, like a hate read that I that I still like kicked my feet for, I oohed and awed at. Kind of similar to Big Little Lies. Like, it is about, like, yes, domestic violence is hideous, but I do love to look at that show. Like, it's very pretty. It's a very fun fantasy. However, I do think that that's a very generous comparison. I do think that Big Little Lies is much better. I remember reading the book as well. I don't recall my thoughts on that, but I do love the show. So I did think this was fun in the end, if a little dumb. If I were to earnestly have read this, my biggest takeaway could be that mothers and daughters have very special bonds. Women are much more powerful than we sometimes allow ourselves to be. But overall, like, I really felt this book was the equivalent to, like, generic noise, like women cheerleading each other. Maybe, like, the visual of Oprah, like, and, like, women going, yeah. So, do I recommend this? I guess if you like those kinds of books, then by all means, yeah, this one was fun. If you don't like those books at all, then definitely not. I don't know what I'm saying. Sometimes you just read something and you're not sure what to make of it. Or like, this is actually the opposite. I know what to make of it. I'm definitely not the demographic for this book. This book was not written for me. I very much enjoyed my time hate reading it, and that was the fun that I extracted. I don't know, guys. This channel is really just my saying what kind of experience I had with each book and the thoughts that I had with it. Obviously, that is not to say that that'll be the same thoughts you will have, the same experience you will have. I guess come at me if you had very different thoughts and feelings of these books. And I'm not going to tell you that they're not valid, so please don't tell me that my thoughts are not valid. I read Divine Might, Goddesses in Greek Myth by Natalie Haynes as a library audiobook read by Natalie Haynes. This is actually my first Natalie Haynes, which I found to be very smart, very intriguing. I'm very stunned and delighted by Natalie Haynes. In the audiobook, her deep British voice chuckling at the bits of humor and irony I just found very delightful to listen to. Her bias for Harrison Ford, the hottest archaeologist. Sentences like an intense action sequence where the two women set up their looms. I just found it all to be extremely, extremely delightful. I could hear her smiling in her performance. Divine Might is a collection of essays where she talks about specific Greek myth goddesses, but with a heavily feminist POV. And she makes them all very relatable by connecting the familiar mythical stories and characters and values with contemporary culture, like, i.e., the Marvel superheroes. So it's another, like, recontextualizing well-known mythic tales, but with contemporary knowledge and morals. So much euphemism for so much rape. Like stories of overconfident men challenging the muses, reflective of modern mansplaining. And she makes some very compelling arguments for each character that the patriarchy and misogyny are at the root of their negative images. I was very impressed by Natalie Haynes. And have since continued to read much more Natalie Haynes. Like this year, I plan to read everything that Natalie Haynes has written that I can find at least. So yes, highly recommend. I read The Happy Couple by Naoise Dolan via library audiobook read by Iola Smart and Britt Seymour. They're so mean. They're so savage. It's like the two characters are talking to each other without telling each other anything. I guess the classic Irish touch. This is my first Naoise Dolan. She just writes such a mean, cutting world that I am personally too soft to enter. Like, Sally Rooney's world is very mumblecore, feet shuffling, and Claire Keegan's world is very efficient, brutal heartbreak. I don't know. In this book, I just felt like I had that feeling where everyone is speaking English, but I just didn't understand anybody still. Yeah, it's about a couple about to get married, but they're like, should we get married? And obviously I was very much like, if you're thinking that, then you shouldn't get married. But the entire time of this very brisk, fast-paced, short-chaptered book, I kept thinking, we won marriage equality for this, for everyone to have the freedom to screw their lives however they choose. Yeah, I personally didn't find this to be that enjoyable. Yeah, everyone was just too mean, and I wanted to exit myself. Exit myself out of this book. I read Beautyland by Marie Helen Bertino as a library audiobook. It was read by Andy Arndt. This is my first Bertino. I have Parakeet slightly on my radar. This is another new release that everybody likes, but I didn't really like. I felt like the offbeat style for the very common trope of this coming of age story to kind of be unnecessary. Like, I thought of Henry Hoke's Open Throat a lot, which is another, like, you know, common story, but putting on different clothing over it to make it seem different, make it seem newer, more offbeat, that I personally just found to not work for me, which I also didn't quite know what to make of it other than I just found it cute. I found Beautyland to be cute, and I wondered, like, what am I missing? Am I just too old for this? So the conceit of the story is that childhood and banal life can feel so alien with so much strange discoveries because the main character is actually an alien, especially if you're not part of the majority, like whether you're queer, whether you're on the spectrum. So while very true, I just felt like the execution felt alienating to the point of literal. Like, it was very off-putting and very distancing. And maybe it's just I don't fundamentally believe in singularity. And that it's just ultimately a matter of, like, waiting and, like, finding your people. Like maybe I'm just too jaded. Like, maybe I'm just too jaded for this book. That's why I was wondering, maybe I'm just too old for this book. Like, I just didn't get the impact of feeling so alienated, like feeling the alienation of loneliness, because I do tend to think in terms of demographics, like the joke of how the emo kid thinks that he's the only one until he goes to an emo concert and sees that everybody else looks just like him and has the same exact interests as they do. And, you know, maybe I'm just too happy for this book myself. Like, I am very unlonely, and I am a very privileged person in the dominant majority. So this particular story, told in this particular way, ultimately just didn't resonate to me. I just read so many glowing 5-star reviews for this book praising its freshness, but I guess I just don't believe that coming-of-age stories need freshness. On the contrary, I felt like the freshening up of this cheapens it. Like, I don't need the gimmick. Reality is more than enough. Like, I had a conversation with Nathan of Nathan's Nook about Beautyland because he loved Beautyland. And I was telling him I felt like such a conservative woman reading this because ultimately here is my worldview. Everyone's born. Everyone spends their childhood seeing if they possess any form of talent, and then everyone gets sorted out dustly. And however much we all feel like we're alone, I don't feel like anyone is inherently alone because we all belong in a grouping. And maybe this is like my marketing background that makes me feel this way. Like, we all end up belonging to some sort of demographic. And that is what is ultimately what is so crushing about life. Like, we're all meaningless. But each day we should still try to find the small joys that make life bearable. And ideally, we'll spend our time helping one another. And I still find narratives outside this worldview very hard to accept. So so I was telling Nathan, I'm too conservative I'm too conservative sometimes. And yes, I invite you to come at me with your opposing POV. But ultimately, this book just made me feel very much like a fuddy-duddy. I read Martyr by Kaveh Akbar, which was very, very generously gifted to me by Matthew Shur-Appa. This is my first, like, publisher-sent book. I don't do, like, arcs. I don't do I don't request books, basically. I actually hate reading arcs. I don't know why. Like, I want to read a book with everybody else when it comes out. I don't feel like a particular high from reading something or watching something before it comes out, before everybody else does. I don't know why. Anyway, I really, really enjoyed this. I thought that this was written very smart. Every single sentence just felt like its own idea, and it was so cleverly written, cleverly presented. Reading this book made my brain feel like it was racing 100 miles per hour, and that was a really enjoyable feeling. Having said that, I'm not sure what to really say about this book. Like, I could not stop thinking of Lester by Raven Leilani, how that book also presented a lot of ideas, like kind of like the whole, each sentence felt like its own little ideas that I was thinking of for the first time. And so I'm still like unsure of what to say about it. I just feel like I like it more than a little bit, but I can't say like, oh, I love this. This made me feel all of these things. Like, this didn't do that. I'm still mulling through this. Like, it's unsettling. This book was unsettling. And I felt like the voice was very fresh. Like, that's the kind of freshness that I want. There's like a narcotic blend of righteous indignation and self-pity. It's a very hungry voice that tries almost a little too hard to get you on their side. And this book speaks to that feeling when everything right now just feels so meaningless, and how hard it is to find that value, the little joys in life to make it all feel worthwhile. Really smart, powerful writing. Super charming, super likable. I saw that the audiobook is read by Arian Moayed, who plays Stewie on Succession. So I can only imagine the audiobook is that much better. Like, that just feels like such a perfect actor to audiobook pairing. Yes, I highly recommend this, especially if you are looking for like that hot contemporary lit fic. I'm aware that back in February that would have been a lot more timely of a recommendation, but nevertheless, here we are, here to tell you that the hype for this is real. Living happened till it didn't. There was no choice in it. To say no to a new day would be unthinkable. So each morning you said yes, then stepped into the consequence. Hi, it is next day, Yana. I am that person who I have a written down list. I tick off each item one by one, and I still forget to talk about one last thing. I go to the store for one thing. I always leave the store without that one thing. That's who I am. So last, definitely not least, Alphabetical Diaries by Sheila Heti. I pre-ordered this from Barnes & Noble. Big fan of Sheila Heti. This one did not fail to please. Heti did not let me down. I always find all of her books that I've read to be extremely earnest, extremely thoughtful. The gimmick to this one, because I find that in each book of hers, she does put a gimmick. Like for Motherhood, it was that coin game. For Pure Color, it was, I'm blanking. Like, so, that's something weird thing that a lot of people didn't like. But personally for me, it tends to work. And in Alphabetical Diaries, she compiled decades worth of diary entries onto a spreadsheet made in alphabetical order. And so you're reading her diary, but in a very out of context format. But I found that it works because it forces the perspective to change and presents them as pure ideas, kind of like a jolt to make you rethink things. And so like I bought the gimmick initially, and I still was kind of skeptical reading it and thought it would be hard to sustain by around the letter M, but I really enjoyed this book. I took my time with it. I personally think that this is a very slow read. It's one to savor. It's really simple sentences, but because of the format, it makes you think about what you're going through in your life at the moment, or at least it did for me. I felt like I really got to know Sheila Heti as a person in that interview, and it informed, reinstilled my like preconceptions of her. I just find that I really like her as a person, like genuinely like her as a person, as a human being. And she and Jalen just had a really wonderful and human conversation in that interview. I don't know. I read parts of this while taking my kid to an indoor playground and reading lines from this, watching him play and enjoy his childhood. I was feeling annoyed, possibly hormonal, but then reading this calmed me down, and it helped reframe my life into like a more broader context. And personally, I do write a diary, I do journal, and I've always loved reading writers' diaries because I kind of feel like it helps inform my own, like what to include and what not to include. And as a diary, I found this to be a very fresh, creative approach for a reader to consume it. I found this to be really open, very honest, very real, like regarding her sex life, petty emotions, guttural desires. Real life, all the base things that people could just go through. Motherhood was my first Sheila Heti that I read, and I found that book to feel very much like being inside a person's head, like being with a friend's thoughts. That's definitely like the main current of all of her novels, and this one just all the more so. This is a book that's not really about anything, it merely is. It really feels like a companion during the time that you're reading it. I really enjoyed this one. If you're a fan of Sheila Heti, I highly recommend this one. If you haven't read a Heti, I do think that this might be a good introduction. I mean, why not? There's nothing particularly hard about this. There's nothing quite inaccessible. Yes, thought-provoking. I asked her what she is most good at in the world, and she said it was making, writing, directing. She wasn't sure what to call it, and I asked what her technique was, and she said, I do it every day. I told Claire that the problem with both having a relationship and being devoted to making art was that thing in the Bible, that man cannot serve two masters. But she said she thought that it was not a conflict because we would be serving, in both cases, the same master, the heart. I told him that I still hadn't written the book I most wanted to write, which talks about the beauty of the world and what is so great about being alive. Really, really good. So that's everything that I read in February. I'm gonna try to like catch up with the times. Like, I'm just here to say that I'm back, baby. I'm still reading. I will probably never stop reading. I love reading, and I realize that I really do love being here, talking to you guys, and hearing your thoughts as opposed to mine, and seeing what everyone else is reading. And hot takes or no hot take, like no new takes, I I want to be here for it. So that's all. So I will leave you at that. I will be back hopefully soon. Like I say every time, with the following monthly wrap-ups, because I mean, your girl has been reading, and I do want to talk to you about all of the books that I read. So thank you for watching. See you soon.